Hello students, good day. Now for today's lecture, we'll be looking into the theories of development. So in our previous discussion, we have introduced what is development administration. So we look into the definition, into the proponents, into the aspect of development administration. Now, how could we administer development without looking into its foundation? So we have to look into the theories of development. So development administration will not exist, or it will not lead further to our goals, which is development, without looking into its conceptual framework or into its foundations. So here are the following learning objectives. So first, we understand the role of theory in development. Second, we differentiate the various theories and schools of thought on development and discuss the role of each theories in providing a better understanding towards development. So may I start with a quote before we start with our lecture, wherein we have Joseph Stiglitz, who is a famous political economist, wherein he stated that development is about transforming the lives of people and not just transforming economies. So when we look into development in a holistic point of view, it's not just only about increasing your wealth or the prosperity of your community or of your constituents, but also looking into other aspects. For instance, would now be your social welfare, education, health, happiness. So that is how we should look into development. Now, moving forward, we have the following theories of development. There are a lot of theories actually of development. However, I only handpick four, and there are sub theories regarding economic liberalization. So we have your modernization theory, your dependency and world system theory. We also include Walt Rostow's 5 stages of modernization, then economic liberalization development, which is sort of like a historical timeline wherein we have this economic theories, which we have your classical economic thought, your Keynesian economics, and your neoliberalization or neoliberalism. So first, we have to understand why do we need to understand what is a theory and why do we need to know theory of development. So theory is a body of philosophical and scientific knowledge which increases understanding of the reality being studied. So the phenomena that we are attempting to understand or study is development. Now, looking into the nature of theory as stated by Newton and Van Deth, here are some natures or characteristic of a theory. First is complexity and abstraction. Theories are relatively complex, abstract, comprehensive, and integrated systems of belief about a certain phenomena. So we look into the abstract, into the concepts, or the complexity, or rather into the belief about development in this case. So what is your belief about development? I believe that development would refer to an increase of wealth, of prosperity. That is one nature of development. Another, or nature of theory, pertaining to development. Second, empirical explanation. Theories claim to explain the phenomena. So why does development exist? Why we need to know development? That is now the role of theory. Normative prescription. Theories offer a vision of how that phenomena could be and ought to be. So basically, when we talk about prescription, we're providing solutions. So in order to attain development, proponents or the theories behind developments would now provide this is the solution for community to attain development. Or to give you an example, we have later Marxism, which has been embedded in your world system theory. Marxism as a theory would now explain what causes undevelopment or poverty. So it explains it's because of class or conflict among classes, exploitation among your upper classes. While on the other hand, normative prescription would now state how to solve poverty. And that would now lead us to development. That is through revolution, through changing the system, a classless society where a government is being governed by your proletariats, by your workers. So that is now the role of theory. Now, moving forward, the first theory that we'll be discussing is on modernization theory. So, modernization theory originated from Max Weber. So, this is the picture of Max Weber, which has been developed by Talcott Parson. So, simply, when we talk about modernization theory posits that communities that localities or cities or states would now transit from a traditional type of society into a modern day society. Later we'll be enumerating what does this modern mean. Okay. So actually we're now explaining. So the concept of modernization is understood in three different meanings. So in the idea or into the theory of Weber, Weber stated that development all began in this region, in the shaded blue region, which is your Western Europe and your Northern America. So basically it's like Eurocentric. The approach is sort of like Eurocentric. So the development started in these regions. So we have your industrial revolution, and that is the primary example when it comes to the modernization theory of Weber. Now, the second process would now include that there are some countries who are undeveloped. So which the second bullet form, the meaning, would now refer to modernization as a process by which countries that do not belong to the first group of countries aim to catch up with them. So this is the most developed region or countries. Then the unshaded portions, probably your second world, your third world, which is sort of debunk. Those concepts were sort of debunked. Will will catch up to the developmental frameworks of your European or your Western countries. Or another concept as well would now be that modernization and colonization concept would now imply that these advanced countries would now spread and influence development. And thus, it would now picture the third meaning, which is now as a process of evolutionary development of most modernized societies, wherein they serve as a model. Now, how can we characterize a developed country, or rather a modern society according to Weber? So first would now be the advancement of reason. So Weber argued that universities, for instance, or the time of enlightenment, so your ideas, your thoughts all began in Europe. And because of those thoughts or those ideas, it would now aid into the development of your societies. Because of that ideas, it would now aid to the innovation of technology. This is the second one. So because of your thoughts, critical thinking, for instance, advancements or contributions to sciences, it would now aid to technology, as stated a while ago. And lastly, development of communication. Particularly in Europe, we have your developments of your mass media, wherein we have your printing press, your Gutenberg press, the invention of your radio, of your televisions. These were all concentrated in your Western regions. And because of this rationalization, the development of your thoughts, it would now lead into the features of modernization. So what makes a society modern? First would now be industrialization. The advancement of technology, the increase of your factory productions, or because of factory, there is a mass production of goods and services. So that is industrialization. Think about technology, about machinery. Urbanization would now include people being concentrated, or the role of cities, the birth of your cities, wherein there is a mass concentration of people. Also would now be the spread of education due to your advancement of reason, the rise of your universities, the increase of your literacy rate, and as well your economic growth stimulated by capitalism. So looking into the argument of Weber, one feature of modernization is a capitalistic system. Ayan. And I forgot what would now lead into the features of modernization. It is because of globalization. So looking into the processes as stated, the last two processes in this part, due to globalization, Western regions are able to influence your other regions, Africa, Asia, the features of modernization. May just present all of the screen. Okay. Also, modernization theory rests on the idea that affluence could be attained by anyone. Affluence means wealth or prosperity. So everybody could be rich or could now attain development as stated by modernization. However, there's only a barrier as stated by Weber. And Weber stated in this second bullet form he argued that the tension between tradition and technological change is the biggest barrier to growth. What makes countries undeveloped, according to Weber, is that because of their traditions. Looking into our previous slide, may I go back to our previous slide. Tradition to a modern society. You must break through from the traditions. He characterized what is this tradition would now be your cultural values and sort of your political institutions might block or delay modernization process. Now, one of the works of Weber is your Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism. If you read the work of Weber, Weber argued that culture is one determinant of your development. There are some countries or places in the world that are undeveloped because their culture is blocking your economic growth, for instance. He argued, for instance, would now be your religion. Culture, element of culture, religion could be one. Um, One aspect is that he compared Protestants and your Roman Catholics, wherein Weber argued that Protestants, particularly Calvinism, are prone to development compared with your Roman Catholics, because your Roman Catholics have this concept on predestination, or rather simplicity, which is the more poor you are, you have a spot in heaven. Unlike with Calvinism, why do you wait for that opportunity when in fact you could now work yourself, having a position in heaven or a spot in heaven, as stated by Weber. And that is why he argued that, for instance, countries such as Germany, England are more developed because there's a religion variable regarding that one. While countries such as Italy are poorer, or more poorer rather, because of religion per se. But when we try to look, there are some problematic, or rather issues, on the works of Weber. Right now, we could now see Italy being part of your G20. Spain, quite developed, yeah. But basically, when we look into micro perspective, there are some Roman Catholics who are richer compared with your Protestants. And same as there are some Protestants who are poorer compared with your Roman Catholics. Another misconception, or trying to debunk the work of Weber, would now be your Confucianism. Weber argued that Asian religions such as Confucianism, Buddhism, also might block or delay the modernization process because these religions promote passivity or simplicity. Passivity, for instance, we have your monks. They are so passive. But when we try to look into our present day situation, among the most, or rather the richest countries, or the most economically developed countries, would now be China. And this would now sort of critique the works of Weber. For instance, we know that China is, by looking into its government, it's communism, right? It's communist, which already tries to uh, argue the features of Weber, which is now capitalism. So that is one wrong notion of Weber. And another thing, looking into Chinese society, their society is embedded with Confucian values. So again, we're already debunking that Weber might be wrong. But again, this is one theory that would now posits the role of development. Also to add, we have South Korea. When we merge his argument on Roman Catholicism and Confucianism, South Korea has been, uh, in history, South Korea uh, experienced a lot of Roman Catholic missionaries. Uh, and another thing is that when we look into the societal values of your South Korea, it is primary Confucian. But when we try to look, South Korea is one of the most developed countries in Asia and particularly in the world. So this would now debunk the idea of Weber. Yan, example lang naman. Moving forward, we have dependency theory and modern world system theory. This is under the critical school of thought. So we have the proponents. May I start with Karl Marx, which has been heavily influenced on the works of these modern day social sciences or political scientists rather. We're in dependency theory. The proponents is we have Hans Singer, then Rolf Prebisch. Then and in your world system theory, we have your Immanuel Wallerstein. Now these two theories basically work on the same framework wherein we have your core, periphery, and your semi-periphery. Yan. This core, periphery, and semi-periphery, this image was actually conceptualized by Wallerstein. He stated that the world is stratified. It is divided and there is a hierarchy. Now, to distinguish your dependency theory and your world system theory, your dependency theory is developed by Hans Singer and Raoul Prebisch, neo-Marxist, yeah. Dependency theory states that it suggests that the lack of development prevails in many countries because Western nations have deliberately underdeveloped them. Underdeveloped and developing countries are dependent towards developed countries. So this is now where dependency theory take its name, no? Dependent. So your undeveloped or your developing countries, particularly your periphery and your semi-periphery, are highly dependent with your core nations. It would now be exemplified later or explained further. So dependency theory, dependent. On the other hand, we have your world system theory, which has been conceptualized by Immanuel Wallerstein. So, aside from conceptualizing the three frameworks, this theory focuses on a larger division of labor that takes place nationally, regionally, and internationally. So, it acknowledged the exploitative nature of capitalism. Yan. We'll understand this one later. To understand this image, may I explain the three stratifications, wherein we have your core systems. They are the most powerful economically, politically, culturally, socially, wherein these states promote capital accumulation through government purchasing, collection of revenues, and financing infrastructure development. So your core states are more likely your industrial nation. On the other hand, we have your periphery. So this is like a bridging stratification between these two. They are, or rather, the semi-periphery is the bridge between your core and your periphery. Your periphery, they belong to the lowest strata or the stratification and receives an unequal distribution of the world's wealth. They are exploited by the core states for their cheap labor, raw material, and agricultural production. And we have a buffer zone. The bridge would now be your semi-periphery. Now, to further understand the things that I'm stating, it's like this. For both dependency and world system. Now, your core nations are the most powerful. So, they will now exploit the resources coming from your semi-periphery and your periphery. Now, your semi-periphery partially functions like your core and your periphery. While your periphery, these are the countries being exploited. Now, to give you an idea, so your periphery is where we get our raw resources. Your agricultural products such as banana, minerals such as gold. Now, the core will buy these resources. I hope you could check now my mouse. At a very cheap price to the periphery. So, buying them at a very cheap price, so exploiting their labor. So, once these resources, raw materials will be going to the core, into its industries, into its factories, it would now be generated into final products or into goods. Now, these goods will now be sold at a very high price. And who are the customers? It would now be coming from your periphery and your semi-periphery. So, what's the problem within this concept? First is you're buying resources at a very cheap price. So who's the winner here? It would now be the core. Now later, we will now be selling these goods, which were resources previously, at the periphery at a very expensive price. Who is the winner here? It would now be your core. So the periphery would now be the loser in this concept. And this is wherein the concept of exploitation takes place. Yan. So it's quite critical. It's under your Marxist school of thought or your critical school of thought. Also, we have your Rostow's 5 stages of modernization. So we have Walt Whitman Rostow, who is the proponent, and he provided 5 stages of development, which is quite in detail. To proceed, we have these stages, wherein the stages starts with your traditional society. So this traditional society is basically your agricultural slash nomadic or pastoral societies. Yan. Now, to proceed, look basing it in the image below, it slowly increases or upgraded to the second stage, which is now your preconditions for takeoff, wherein we could now see features such as agricultural and the initiation or the establishment of your industries, of your factories. Then later, through such features such as an increase of your industries, of your other infrastructure projects, we have your takeoff. We're in development of manufacturing sector. We'll discuss this in detail. And later, we have your drive of maturity. And the last stage is now your high mass consumption. So, I hope you could now visualize the stages. The first stage is more likely focusing on the household, on the family. You could just pause it, take a screenshot of this one, no? Yan. So, traditional stage, local communities, household, more likely they focus on their needs, which is now primary on good. Now, the community would now improve and later experience your precondition of takeoff, where agricultural becomes more mechanized. What do we mean about this one? We now use technology to produce more. So, more output is traded. Agriculture also produces sufficient food grains and meet the demand. Unlike with your tradition, your resources are limited, they are scarce. However, this one, there is now a surplus and there is now the initiation of trade. When we look into basic economics, what do you call this one? Surplus, what do you do with your surplus? You have to trade it for other goods that you need. If you will not be utilizing your surplus products, it would now lead into spoilage. And this would now lead to the birth of your modern day market, your trades. Also, one feature would now be the building of infrastructure. Because of trade, you need infrastructure, roads, etc. You also need your warehouses to stock the goods. Now, the third stage would now be your takeoff. Industrialization begins to occur, and workers and institutions become concentrated around a new industry. So this would now be the birth of your cities. People begin to use their individual talents to produce things beyond necessities. Wherein the talents in this one would now just be on agricultural related, but there is now a birth of other sectors. This would now include, for instance, your engineering sector, your health, etc., which would now lead into new markets for trades. Also, in a social point of view, greater individualism takes hold and social status is more likely linked with material wealth. The fourth stage is now your technological maturity. There is a technological growth in this period, which is the bare fruit of population growth, reduction in absolute poverty levels, and more diverse job opportunities. So nations are created and pushes for social changes. And lastly, the main goal of every country, speaking about development, is high mass consumption, according to Rostow. Here, a country's economy flourish in a capitalistic system. So, one feature of a highly developed attaining this last stage is now capitalism. Countries are big enough that production becomes more of wants than needs. Example of this one would now be your brands, diba? Wherein we have your McDonald's, diba? Jollibees. You're now checking on the brand rather than the need, which is simple food, etc. And actually, the last part is now economic liberalization development. This is sort of like an historical timeline wherein we look into the developments of three economic school of thoughts. We have your classical economic thought, your Keynesian economics, and your neo-liberalization of development or neoliberalism. So first, we look into the classical economic thought, which is we have Adam Smith, the father of economics, who is the proponent of your laissez-faire or your free market capitalism. Now, what does this laissez-faire means? Smith argued that lesser government intervention in the market will stimulate profit growth and capital accumulation. So this is under macroeconomics. When we look into the concept or into the argument of Smith, government, it's like ginigipit niya in Tagalog, ginigipit niya yung leeg ng isang tao. So kung ginigipit niya yung leeg ng isang tao, that person could not do freely what he wants, thus lessening productivity. Now, in that analogy alone, if we get rid or minimize the role of government, people, especially in the commerce field, have have the free will to do their activities, their economic activities. Thus, it would now increase productivity. Yan. So that is now Adam Smith. Yeah. uh, when we talk about government intervention, this would now include regulations in terms of businesses, taxation, and especially the government gets tax from your people. So lesser tax people would now invest their money into their businesses or into other materials. But the problem with your your classical economics with your laissez-faire system is how if there are economic crisis or how if there are financial crisis, and this is now your second school of thought comes in, wherein we now have the theory of John Maynard Keynes, which is now your Keynesian economics. This is during your Great Depression, and Keynes argued in order to solve this Great Depression that government have to reinvigorate markets with infusion of capital. So the government would now be the instrument in order to get away from such economic crisis such as your depression or your inflation. So he provided these two solutions. First, we could now see the role or the intervention of government, wherein government spending as a solution to revive the economy by bolstering aggregate demand through fiscal and monetary policies. Fiscal policy would now include taxation, and monetary policies would now include the role of your central banks. And this has been used in your 1930s, late 1930s during your Great Depression. The argument here is that first, the government would now create jobs, or rather, not before creating jobs, the government will now conduct huge, massive projects, for instance, infrastructure projects. So, what will happen there is that we have a project, people who don't have jobs because there is a depression happening during that time will now get papatusan na nila, nagtagalog na, papatusan na nila yung trabaho na ino-offer ng government kahit mura yan, kahit mababa yung sahod, at least may trabaho. Therefore, people who are unemployed, being employed at a government project will now have income. They have now employment, thus they have now income. And when they have income, the unemployed people, they will now spend it into important goods. So, basically, the market that does not have any customers will now have customers. Yan. Thus, there's already a generation of income. Now, businesses have income. This is now wherein the government comes into place. So, yung government nun will now collect taxes from the businesses dahil may customer na sila. And the taxes that has been collected by the government, it would now be reinvest into other government projects. So that is now the infusion, the aggregate demand, the infusion of the government. Now, the second concrete solution is now the creation of your authority. Why? Let's go back dito. Walang pera yung government kasi may Great Depression. Saan siya hihingi ng pera? Hihingi siya sa international authority, sa mga international organizations. And also, the world international relations, to be exact, it's sort of chaotic. So that is in order to make things organized, Keynes provided that there should be an international organization which sort of govern the conduct or the behavior of your countries economically, wherein he proposes now your Bretton Woods system, wherein we have your GATT, your General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, your International Monetary Fund, and your World Bank. Yan. Now again, it's like synthesis ni Hegel, di ba? We have Adam Smith, we have Keynes, at mamaya they have now criticized yung masyadong pag-intervene ng government, no? So that is now, we have now the ideas of Frederick, Hayek, and Milton, Friedman, which is now the resurgence of liberalism. So he stated, Hayek and Friedman stated that, the government again is hinihigpitan niya yung leeg. Kaya nagkaroon tayo ng stagflation, di ba? Combination of rising unemployment and inflation. Thus, we should now see the minimal intervention again of your government. and from the creation of your Bretton Woods system as proposed by Maynard Keynes, this would now be these organizations would now lead or promote itong neoliberalism, yung medyo pagwala na ng government, no? At ano ibig ko sabihin nito, na minimal na or minsan nawawala na yung function or responsibility ng government. So ito yung mga principles which has been stated by your neoliberalism, wherein we have your free trade, that the government should not intervene into the trading activities of countries. Just let your private sector trade. Yan, di ba? Free trade. No more taxes. No more tariff. Tariff is a tax imposed in your imported goods. Deregularization, wherein the government, again, there's a minimal intervention of your government in terms of such goods such as oil. Just let the private sector do its job. Privatization. Some assets, companies of the government will now be transferred into your private sector. And universal expansion of markets. So this universal expansion of markets would now just be that we have your TNCs, your MNCs, your national companies would just expand further. And the argument of Hayek and Friedman, going back with the argument of your classical economic thought, is that due to these principles, it would now stimulate economic growth. Just let your private sector, your businesses free. But again, one issue regarding your neoliberalism is that first, it would now lead to an inequality. How about those countries, those economies who are not competitive, 'di ba? Ang labas na naman dyan would now be exploitation in nature. Yan. Neoliberalism also became a codified strategy of the Bretton Woods system of your institutions and the United States Treasury Department. Yan. So these are just the following theories. I hope you have learned something amidst the very disorganized lecture. So to end my lecture, I see light at the end of the tunnel, which has been stated by Walt Whitman Rostow. Sooner or later, we'll be achieving your developments. Thank you.